Hi, and welcome to another edition of Hey Coach. Here today we got a familiar friend. I think you got the record of most times on the show. My good buddy Fred Almade, who was our head guidance counselor at Centennial High School, also my golfing partner. How you doing there, Fred?
Everything's fine. Crazy year, but it's good to be back.
Good to be back. Now how many years have you been at Centennial?
Been at Centennial since 1999. You can do the math. Been in the district 26 or 27 years. Been a guidance counselor 30 plus. Let's just call it that, 30 plus.
And you're coming down the home stretch.
You're getting in on the 18th hole.
On the 18th hole,
Yeah.
Okay. You let me know when you're putting.
I got you.
We'll
got you.
have the party set up. Right now, what should parents be doing if they're thinking about having their student athletes try for a scholarship in college?
For any Division I or Division II possible athletes getting financial aid, meaning you just had the signing for football, Division I.
Yesterday.
Division II's in the same way. And that's for other sports, not only football. Everybody just thinks football, but you got basketball, you have tennis, if you're Division I tennis, or golf. Any of the sports, you have to go through the NCAA clearinghouse. Now, they call it now the NCAA Eligibility Center. I still call it the clearinghouse, as do many people do. And what the parents should be doing is when the students become a junior, they should go on the website, which they can Google, or just go to ncaaeligibility.org and create a profile and have an account for their son or daughter.
Now, once they do this, then they should go to the school that they're trying to get the scholarship from. Now, I know you can't attend it in person like you used to, but most of these schools will have a virtual setup.
Yeah, at Centennial, every school has a representative that's in charge, or maybe a couple representatives. Could be guidance counselors, could be assistant principals, or the principal. At our school, myself and another guidance counselor handle it, so anybody can email us. And what we do basically is we make sure that all the credits are up to date that count towards the eligibility, meaning the academic credits. And then once students have created a password and have an account, then we go in and we can upload their transcripts, which should have all their courses updated and their test scores.
And you shouldn't wait. You should do this at the beginning of your junior year.
Well,
right?
I would create the account beginning of their junior year, and then usually at the end of your junior year or mid-year, when all the grades are in, that's when you would first send in everything to, get not officially approved, but that way the coaches can go in and look and see if you're, possibly eligible, if they're recruiting you to academically make the grade.
Has there been any changes with the COVID this year? Has COVID changed anything about the eligibility?
That's a very good question, because this year, the NCAA, for any athlete that's going to be a college student in the 21-22 school year, that would be this year's seniors.
That's our juniors.
That would be our seniors.
Your seniors this year.
For next fall, 21-22.
Okay.
That they have waived the SAT, ACT requirement.
Wow.
Which is all sports. Now, for juniors, they haven't announced, of course. In St. Lucie County, one of the good things for juniors is we give the SAT for free in the spring. So this year's juniors, if they're thinking they're going to be going Division I, Division II, will have an opportunity to take that test. But current seniors going 21-22, they have waived the SAT, ACT requirement.
So for the seniors, they're just looking at their GPA?
Correct. The GPA, the minimum GPA, has to be a 2.3 in what they call 16 required core subjects.
Okay.
Now that's a tough thing to understand when you're looking at just basic high school credits. As I mentioned before, all the schools update their course load, meaning new courses that we offer, and the NCAA has to approve them. The toughest ones that students have are the math requirements. So make sure that at every school, and every school is a little different, that the students understand the math requirement in trying to get the 3 credits for math for the clearinghouse.
So the sliding scale is gone now. Right?
Well, the sliding scale, yes, for this upcoming year, it's gone. So in the past, if you had a minimum requirement of 2.3, and let's hope You did better than that,
Right.
16 core. You would need at least an SAT score of 980, and I think the ACT score on a combined score was 75.
Right.
So this upcoming year, if you had a 2.3, you're in if you can get the scholarship without the test score.
So this opens up kind of a lot of schools for a lot of different students.
Well, yeah, it makes it a lot easier to be recruited.
Right, that's what I was getting at.
Yes, and again, we still have spring sports, so any senior playing baseball or tennis or any of the spring sports, track and field, trying to get Division I scholarships, you just work on your academics and as a senior, and you know that takes a little pressure off you trying to make your score, your SAT score.
I know the ADs wanted me to mention that there's been a lot of changes in the games this year. You know, for many years you used to, be the voice of the Eagles at Centennial, and I know they're limiting the amount of people that can go to the games this year, like 20%. And the ADs wanted me to mention that, in order to go to a lot of these high school games, you got to purchase your tickets online ahead of time and just contact the athletic office. I mean, I know a lot of schools are live streaming. My son Joe over at Westwood has Panther Nation, where they have about 4 to 6 students, and they do a great job filming the games. Also, we just finished up a very successful football season in this area. Treasure Coast did a wonderful job. They went undefeated. They lost a heartbreaker in overtime to a tough Palmetto team. But, congratulations to Coach Jones. Also, Coach George over at Westwood had a great season. They lost to school Palmetto, another Palmetto up north. It's ironic, both of our schools lost to Palmetto. And very, very good season for them. And now we get into the winter sports, and who knows how COVID's going to affect that. But one thing I know that you really want to talk about is college football. And it's something that you and I have watched for many years. Obviously, this year is unique. I mean, we really don't know what games are being played until that day. And, they're going to have the playoff selection show on Sunday. Is that correct?
Correct. That's why the NCAA is going to be doing it, and it's been a challenge. And one of the harder things that's being thrown around now is how do you judge a team that has maybe 5 games versus teams that have 8, 9, 10 games, and how do you judge them equally? And that's something that the show, when they have it on Sunday, a lot of people are going to be watching based on a committee that's going to be picking who's going where.
Right, and our good friend Gina from Fort Pierce wanted me to ask you this question. How can the Big Ten change the rules at the end of the game? They said you had to have 6 games to play. Now again, we know it's nobody's fault, and they're talking directly about Ohio State. And I think their point was they wanted to get Ohio State into the championship game, no matter what.
Well, Gina from Fort Pierce, what I think with the Big Ten is that because this is the pandemic year, the odd year,
right,
that they decided, let's make rules as we go on. Just like we're rolling with the punches.
But here's my point. The Big Ten's making rules. It's not, each conference is making their own rules how to do it. I think the SEC came out the best with this because they started a little bit early and they put in 2 bye weeks. But the Big Ten rules, granted, that's helping Ohio State, and I do not have a problem with that. I have a problem with, let's look at Cincinnati, who has played more games, is undefeated, but every time the selection committee comes out each Tuesday, they've been dropping for not playing. And Ohio State is saying the same or even going up for not playing.
Well, the commissioner of the conference that Cincinnati's in came out yesterday, and I think he was very forceful in saying that there's 2 rules, there's 2 standards, let me put it that way. Your Power 5, which Ohio State, Big Ten is, versus schools like Cincinnati, right, who's undefeated, schools like Coastal Carolina, who I think is 12-0, who's played 12 games or a good amount of games, undefeated. There's no way that they are ever going to be thought of by a committee on that same level. And
So
I think that's, in a pandemic year, you see it even more, how the disparity shows.
But even in a non-pandemic year, if you're not in a Power 5 in football, you have hardly any chance of making it to the playoffs. Right? Now look at basketball, it's so different. Basketball, you have 350 schools. Every single one of them, if they play, win their conference, get into the NCAA tournament, they have a chance to win it. If you're not a Power 5, you have no chance.
Well, I think that's what makes March Madness, if it's March this year, for basketball, so unique, is that, you can have some schools that maybe have 3,000 kids and been playing basketball for 10 years versus the blue bloods that have been playing forever. Football this year, I think, had an opportunity to do that if they could have went to 8 games.
And what is the reason?
Yeah,
right. And
8 teams, I should say.
Right. We have talked about that. What is the reason? And please don't tell me it's for kids missing school, because they're on their break right now.
Right.
And most of these kids are doing school virtually.
Well, football's a big tradition-driven sport. Okay. And I think that, we've had the Final Four now for 10 or 12 years. So I think that they wanted to keep that the same. But this would have been a perfect year in this crazy environment, with all the things, especially when you're looking at teams like Cincinnati and Coastal. It would have been fun to have,
Right.
if Coastal's 8 play in Alabama, who's 1, wouldn't that be unique? I mean, they might not do very well,
Right.
but it really, I think, would open a lot of people's eyes who are kind of getting a little sick of the same people at the same, every year playing for the Final Four, where you could have a March Madness type of environment, but it just didn't happen.
And you mentioned this to me on a phone call yesterday when we looked at the recruiting scene. Out of the top 5 teams, 4 of them are the ones that are ranked 1, 2, 3, 4. Alabama, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Clemson. I think LSU got in there. So the rich get richer. Now, my question is, and we're going to do a little bit of hypothetical scenarios here. Let's say if Notre Dame beats Clemson, is Clemson out?
Well, based on everything that the committee has done up to this point, if it's a close game and Clemson would have 2 losses, it looks like they would vote Clemson in. Now, again, that comes back to, the tradition of the sport and what has happened in the past. But no team with 2 losses has ever got into the Final Four, as we know it in the last 10 years. So that would be an interesting point. I know they would have lost to Notre Dame twice, which is in the top 3 or 4, whatever they're ranked now or have been ranked. But, that would start, a precedent. But the committee this year, and there's different people on the committee this year than there have been in the past, has been at a lot of controversial things that they have done in the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Right. Now, if Clemson wins, it should be very, very obvious that they have the top 4, correct?
I would assume, yeah.
So we're going to have Alabama, Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State.
Well, if Ohio State beats Northwestern.
If Northwestern beats Ohio State's out.
I would assume, but you never know. Again, that gets back to the games. Ohio State's only played 5 games. This is their 6th game.
So they would be 5-1.
They would be 5-1, and is that body of work better than somebody, and you've seen the top 10, somebody that has maybe 2 losses or playing harder teams?
A&M would be, I think they play
with
this
1
weekend,
loss. If they
would
win
be
this
9-1 with 1 loss to the number 1 team,
in the country.
Alabama.
Correct.
Okay. Now you got another scenario where you have Iowa State, which if I'm not mistaken, started off 1-2, lost to Louisiana, not LSU, Louisiana, and they have run the table. They play Oklahoma this week. They beat Oklahoma, and Clemson loses. Would they be able to jump in?
Well, that's why I said the committee's been very controversial this year, is because they keep talking about, when they interview the leader of that group, who is the University of Iowa, AD, by the way, that he keeps saying they look at the eyeball test.
Yeah, but here's my question. Their eyeball test and you and me eyeball test, what's the difference? What are they looking at statistics?
Well, they don't really say. It's like the University of Georgia has 2 losses.
Right.
And again, they're ranked higher than other teams, and they got, quote unquote, blown out by Florida.
Right.
And they got blown out by Alabama.
Right.
And even some of their wins weren't very impressive. But they said now they got a different quarterback who was injured. And the eyeball test to them says that they should be ranked higher than some other teams. Again, that gets back to a committee eyeballing or in a room with 12 people talking about what if, what could be, and what has happened in the last couple weeks.
Now you got the Pac-10 that nobody talks about, even though they have some great games out there. USC is playing Oregon. Oregon shouldn't be playing. If I'm not mistaken, they lost to Washington, but Washington's in the COVID quarantine, so they can't play. So now the second place team goes. So USC can beat them. I think that would make them 6 or 7-0. They beat everybody they played. They have no chance of going in. Now this is a Power 5 team.
Well, again, there's your eyeball test. If anybody watched USC, they've won like 3 games in the last 5 minutes to teams that they should have beat, fairly easily. So again, when you look at the eyeball test at that point, and the Pac-10, we don't see it a lot here because they play noontime. Might be 9 o'clock out there, noontime games here. So they're not getting the airtime that an SEC team would get, a Big Ten team would get, or an ACC team would get.
See, and again, we got to be honest. This is money driven. These schools got to make the money, especially in the COVID situation, because they lost a great deal of money because of the attendance at the games. Nobody's there, or hardly anybody's there. I think LSU let in 15 or 16,000. So they got to make up the revenue somehow. So I think the TV ratings generate the revenue also.
Well, when you look at, we talk about the Power 5 and the big teams, and you can use Ohio State as an example. The alumni that they have across the country are going to watch their games. So that's more TV revenue, more advertising, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where money does come in, again, especially when you're not putting people in the stands. Because, again, most of the schools have very little in the stands and not generating any revenue. So TV looks at it as a money thing. We're looking at it as something unique if we could have 8 teams, which we're not going to have. So everybody is looking at it in a different way. And then the viewer is going to watch it no matter what. So, it just depends on the eye of the beholder.
Now, here's the question. You got your top 4. They're going to be picked on Sunday. Okay, so Sunday is what, 18th, I think, or 17th? You got 2 weeks before you play the semifinals. Suppose one of those teams go into COVID, quarantine.
Well, that's, in everything that I've been reading, they're trying to make it, especially the last 2, because it's in Miami, the championship game, that the last 2 teams, they are going to try and put them in a quote-unquote bubble. But when you got 4 on campus, now again, a lot of the campuses didn't go back after Thanksgiving,
right.
So there's really nobody there. So I would assume that it would be, in a year like this, awful odd to have quarantine that would affect the Final 4. Let's put it that way. Now, if you got a marquee player, because all 4 teams, if they get in, that we think have marquee quarterbacks, could you imagine if one of those marquee players or the coach, who's, again, brand name, comes down with COVID? That would be like icing on the cake for 2020.
But I just wonder what happens if, we definitely, hopefully that doesn't happen. One of these teams don't play. Do you take the number 5 team and put them in?
Well, from what I understand, that's their plan. But then you would have to rank the teams. Like we're talking 4. So who do you rank 5, 6, and 7? And I guess that final ranking that's going to be Sunday would matter to those teams that are 5 and 6 if you get to that point,
Now, another situation we're at is that the NCAA approved blanket waivers for everybody for this year. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, what they did, and they're doing it for baseball, or they did it for baseball last year because the season was cut short. Any senior or any grad student that's exhausted their eligibility basically can come back for next year. Now, that's up to each individual school. If they want to offer them, maybe you have somebody you don't want to come back, and you don't have to, renew their scholarship. Most will. Baseball's in the same situation. So last spring in the NCAA, you have players that were juniors, now are going to be juniors again, and we know juniors get drafted in baseball, although they only had five runs at the Major League Draft last year. But next year is going to be a kind of a different year because a lot of teams have to watch their scholarship limit, which the NCAA has not come out and said how many you can offer. It's 85 right now, but you have 15 seniors that want to come back, and you say they can come back. Are they going to let them on their scholarship with 100 for 1 year, which I think they'll probably do. So that's going to be a tricky slope. And then you have coaches that are trying to recruit kids and say, come on in and play, and then you have seniors that want to come back, and that gets a little tricky.
Mess.
Yeah.
And then you have players who are opting out, who have opted out this year, big names who have opted out, not trying to get COVID, protecting themselves so they can be drafted. And then you have, this is the first time, obviously, we're in a year that, unlike any other year, we have teams that opted out of bowl games, and bowl games that are going to be canceled like crazy. I think about 8 or 9 bowl games have been shut down already. Teams are pulling out. And again, there's a lot of reasons for that.
Well, the bowls were there for teams that had at least 6 wins. Well, some teams aren't playing 6 games. So, the records of the teams going into the bowl this year are not going to be impressive. And like you said, there's about half of the amount of bowls that are going to be played. So I think it's an individual matter between the teams and the players. Are they motivated to go? Because you're not going to have the same festivities at the bowls. We really don't know at some of the bowls, like the Rose Bowl, which I think is great. Every year you have to watch a Rose Bowl. Right. That they don't even know if they're, one, going to play it in California, in LA, and 2, are they going to have any kind of fans? And if they do, what's the number? Which takes away from what the Rose Bowl is all about.
And the attendance will be very minimal, especially if you got, I'm just throwing names out, you got a team from Georgia and a team from Wyoming playing in Texas. Just using that as a scenario. Who's going to attend those games? Because they're not bringing anybody traveling because nobody can travel. And then the people there are not going to go because they're not local teams. I mean, if they do the bowls this year, besides the Final Four, I think they're going to do the bowls very, very centralized. They're going to try to match up teams centralized so you don't have to do that travel.
One thing about this year, and you talk about the number of fans, just like that in high school too, that it affected a lot of the teams. Sure. College football is a sport where emotion's big.
Right.
And you get fans, especially some of those really big schools in the SEC, or just a big game atmosphere, that now you don't have that. And so players have to motivate themselves. It's like high school, you only have a certain amount of tickets. The basketball's going with that, what you talked about a little while ago. That, the emotion of what the crowd brings is non-existent. And that was one of the crazy things about this year. And it's like that in high school at this point. So when you're looking at the bowls, to have bowl games that really, a lot of them aren't heavily attended, but it's more for the teams and all that, you're going to be missing that, and it does make an odd environment.
And I was watching last night the Chaminade from Hollywood down South Florida playing University Christian in the state championship. I think it was the 3A, and they were playing at Doak Campbell Stadium in Tallahassee, and that holds 90,000, right? Mm-hmm. If they had 9 people there, they were lucky. I mean, it just looked like this big coliseum with nobody in it, and it's such a shame. I mean, the enthusiasm was on the field. It was a tremendous game. University Christian won in the last minute. but it just takes away from everything. And I think it's going to be harder, and I know I had conversations with the people at the FHSAA. Basketball is going to be, the big tournament up in Lakeland. How are they going to run that? And something like the wrestling tournaments, and, we held the baseball tournament here for many years. I'm trying to picture how I would have done it, when we were hosting the tournament. You got to be so careful. Now, hopefully, keeping our fingers crossed, we're not in this situation a few months from now, we get back to a little bit normal. Well, we got 3 minutes left, and it's just time for you to make Fred's fearless predictions. Now remember, there's many people out there watching, okay? So your Final Four, now we're talking on a Thursday, okay? They haven't played the championship game yet on Saturday, and they haven't had the selection committee. So I'm putting you on the spot there, Fred. Who's going to be the Final Four?
Well, I think the Final Four is not going to change from what it's been most of the year. I mean, even if Alabama loses,
Even if Alabama loses the four,
they're in, because Alabama's all year been just the number one team in the country.
Right.
And then I think, how you rank them 2, 3, 4 depends on the games. But if Clemson beats Notre Dame, and I personally think even if Notre Dame beats Clemson and it's a close game,
Right.
Like they had last time,
Right.
they played overtime. But even if it's a close game, which I don't think Notre Dame's going to beat them, but if it does happen,
So you're saying Clemson?
that Clemson would be the first two-loss
Okay.
team, kind of break the the trend of what's going on. So I got Alabama, Notre Dame, I got Clemson, and then I do think Ohio State, and this is my opinion, strictly because of people watching TV. As I said before, they bring a huge crowd. If they win, they play Northwestern. I think they're the fourth team in. It's going to cause a lot of controversy because I think that's only their sixth win.
Sixth win.
But they would be the conference champ.
Right.
Again, if Clemson loses, and Notre Dame would be the conference champ, first time ever. So those four are in. As long as Texas A&M wins this week, I think they stay at 5. And so I think they would be as we talked before,
They would be the backup.
the backup, or if something happens with COVID, and a team can't play, I think they would go in. But I think those would be the 4.
So who are you picking now?
I hate to say it, but my old friend, Mr. Saban, I think is going to get his championship this year.
Number 7. So they would
7.
play the way you have a scenario. And think of this, no matter what happens, Clemson and Notre Dame are going to play again.
Yeah, that's
the third time.
well. I think the committee would look at that, trying not to, and
pull
maybe have
one of them as 4.
Alabama play one of them, because if Clemson loses 2 losses, they would
Right.
have to be the 4th ranked
Right.
team. So they would play Alabama in a 1-4, 2-3.
So that would be Alabama, Clemson,
if they lose,
or Alabama, Notre Dame, and then
Right.
Ohio State would get the other team.
would get Clemson,
and then in the final. So you're hearing it now, folks. Fred's fearless predictions. But we want to say thank you for watching. Hope everybody has a safe holiday season, and be safe out there and wear a mask. And we'll see you next time on Hey Coach.